and welcome to our Kids in Crisis event here this evening. My name is Nathaniel Shuda. I'm the editor of the Oshkosh Northwestern, which is part of the USA Today Network Wisconsin. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight and being a part of this town hall event here at the Best Western Premier Waterfront Hotel here in Oshkosh. For those of you here in the audience here tonight, as well as those watching us online. For the past 2 years, USA Today Network Wisconsin has been undergoing a very special project called Kids in Crisis. Obviously, if you're here tonight, you're at least somewhat familiar with that. And it's been focusing on youth mental health and suicide, and a lot of these different issues that people have been somewhat hesitant to talk about in the past. And through our reporting on this issue and talking to people who have had personal experiences, talking to experts, and doing interviews and stories in a variety of different mediums, whether it be in our print editions or on our online platforms and in town halls like this, we've been able to raise awareness throughout the state of Wisconsin on these types of issues and how important it is to help our youth in the state of Wisconsin. That's been recognized by our state lawmakers and our stakeholders in the communities, such as Oshkosh. And last year, we even were able to start affecting some change in our local communities and across the state in terms of funding for programs to help people in Oshkosh throughout the state of Wisconsin, and really striving to make a positive difference in our community. So on behalf of the Oshkosh Northwestern and USA Today Network Wisconsin, I again would like to thank you for coming out tonight. We appreciate your support and being able to hopefully take away from tonight some things that can hopefully save a life, if not more than one. So thank you very much, and now I'd like to introduce our engagement editor, Jen Zettel, who'll be talking a little bit about our series and introduce you to this evening's speakers.
Nathaniel. So as Nathaniel said, I'd also like to thank you all for being here tonight to discuss this incredibly important topic. I'll be moderating tonight's event, and before we get started, we want to acknowledge Bellin Health, whose underwriting support has helped make the Kids in Crisis series possible. So since the series has launched, we've seen progress. Schools and communities are offering more support for struggling students. Lawmakers have taken action by putting more money toward mental health programming. Parents, teachers, and students have undergone training to help them broach the topic of suicide with someone they are concerned about. Those steps are important, but everyone here tonight knows we still have a long way to go. In this third year of the Kids in Crisis series, we're amplifying the voices of youth and young adults who are living with mental health challenges. We've asked them to share their stories with us at town halls just like this one. Their stories are raw and powerful. So if at any time you feel the need to step outside, we ask that you please do so. After the storytellers are finished tonight, we will have a panel discussion with local mental health experts. If you have any questions for the panelists, please use the pencil and the note card at your seat, and someone will collect those a little later on. For those watching online, you can leave your questions in the comments section, and we have someone watching for those here at the hotel. And with that, we will start with tonight's first story from Frankie.
Hi, my name is Frankie. I just turned 16 this January. Some of you might know me. I am a performer. I bring my keyboard and I sing around Wisconsin, most especially here in Oshkosh. I started performing in my early life, such as when I was 11, I sang the national anthem for the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field. I've sung for Governor Walker, multiple Miss Wisconsin and Oshkosh pageants, many charity events, and that is all of that has caused people to judge me and openly hate me. And it's caused me to actually leave 2 schools. When everything kind of all started, I wrote a song called Me, Myself, and I based on bullying and suicide awareness. So I came here today to sing that for you, so I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Frankie. All right, and our next storyteller is Renee.
My name is Renee Beasy. I am a spoken word artist. I am an author of children's books that are really intended for big people. And I am grateful that I can put a sentence together. So I've put a whole bunch of sentences together for you tonight. And if you enjoy this piece, you can find a lot more of me online. So thank you for letting me speak with you tonight. Put my glasses on so I can see what I'm saying. Line them up. Line up the teachers that insisted I couldn't get it right. The teachers highly critical of stepping out of line, coloring out of line, talking out of line, expressing out of line, playing sports outside of my gender line. What is wrong with me? Line them up. The social workers who asked me exposing questions right in front of my parents. What is wrong with me? Line up the nurses who giggled, tisked, and shamed me about my crusty, dirty socks as I lie on the x-ray machine again with an injury from my mama. Line up the neighbors who ignored the constant screams and drove away in their trucks away from that odd child. Line up the police who were there to serve and protect, to rescue me from bad people who brought me back home without a single inquiry about why I ran away. It's easier to believe she's a bad child, a defiant teenager, they say. What is wrong with me? Line up the doctors who glared over their glasses in disgust when I arrived in their office pregnant and living on the street at 15. What is wrong with me? Line up the police who came to my door, my domestically violent door at the age of 16, caring for a small baby with a man 9 years my senior, hoping for rescue, calling for safety, desperately needing to hear the words of, "I've got you. No worries, ma'am. We are here for you. You are safe." Line up the words instead that echoed across the walls in my trashed apartment. "We can't help you. Your face is bruised, your child at risk, but he's your husband. You're his wife. Don't you see? What is wrong with me?" Line up the relatives who found it simpler to smile through the holidays, to walk away in disgust, to criticize because my depression was so great. The depression I carried for my entire family. What is wrong with me? Line up the psychiatrist who wanted to medicate after 4 minutes as I pointed to the clock on the wall and objected to his evaluation with no history in question, no curiosity about how far I've come so far, slap a label across my forehead and push pills my way to silence me. What is wrong with me? Line up the pastors who tell me I'm not worthy. Ha! I've got that part already. I just didn't need you to agree with my evaluation. What is wrong with me? Isn't that degree supposed to give you some intellect, some awareness, awakening of what's happening in this world? Doesn't that badge on your chest give an indication of protection? Doesn't that uniform give hope? Doesn't that robe you wear infer wisdom? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? That you sit in your office all pretty and tight, judging in court, deciding I'm a bad seed. Line them up. The counselors, the retreats, the mountains I have climbed, the pyramids I have prayed upon, line them up. The mentors, the masters awake to PTSD, line them up. The brilliant here walking among us to validate to validate the truth, my experience, my innocence. Line them up. The ancient tones of the universe that has my back in spite of the limited human ideas. So, no medication here. Line them up. The friends who refused to hang up the phone while I clamored through the recesses of my brain to understand the recesses of my brain. Line up the miles I have driven to find my gentle heart, the nights I have dreamed, the scars on my knees. Line them up every moment I have intentionally fallen into the darkness to find the lost pieces of my soul so I will, so I do walk in heaven on earth. What's wrong with me? Not a darn thing.
All right, and our final storyteller tonight is Ashley.
My name is Ashley Rinke, and I'm actually a mental health therapist at Catalpa Health in Appleton. As a therapist, I'm given the unique opportunity every day to be able to hear these kids' stories and to hear the things that they're struggling with and to be able to support them through these things. And so when I volunteered for this event tonight, I was excited to share why it is I do what I do and why I love what I do. And yet there was a unique piece of that that I didn't realize, and that is the opportunity to share a story that isn't heard very often, and that's my story and my journey through my own mental health struggles. And oddly enough, it relates exactly to why I am standing here tonight as a therapist. And so my story starts 16 years ago. I was just starting 6th grade, and at that point in my life, my friendship groups were changing, and I didn't have any strong friendships at that point. I didn't feel a strong connection with any of those friends because we were all trying to find ourselves and find new groups that we maybe, related with more. And so I didn't have those strong friendships in 6th grade. And I was painfully shy, and unfortunately I was an easy target for bullying. And it was the first time in my life that school wasn't enjoyable for me, and I started dreading school, and I became to hate school and to not want to be there. And I would get so worked up over going to school that I started getting headaches and stomach aches, and I would feel nauseous and lightheaded, and I'd feel like I was going to pass out. And it got so bad to the point that I missed so much of my 6th grade. If I wasn't calling into school, I was going home early, going up to the office and crying, asking my mom to come pick me up. And it was hard. I didn't know what was happening. My parents didn't know what was happening. Mental health wasn't something that, back when I was in middle school, people talked about. It was taboo. It was hush-hush, don't talk about it. And so I didn't have that awareness that what I was actually going through wasn't physical. It was mental health. I was struggling with anxiety on a day-to-day basis. And I didn't understand that that was what was happening. And so when my parents took me to the doctor and we ran a bunch of tests, I got a lot of blood drawn, and there were no results. My parents felt helpless. I felt helpless. I felt hopeless. And that anxiety turned into sadness, and it turned into hopelessness, and not having hope for my future. And 6th grade was a dark year for me. I didn't feel like things were going to get better. I felt like, what's the point? I didn't understand what was happening for me. I felt isolated and alone in my experiences because other kids weren't talking about this. Nobody understood me, and I was struggling. And there was one day in particular, I remember like the back of my hand. I could remember it like it was yesterday. And I remember I had a really bad day. I was bullied on the bus, and I came home. And I went up to my room and I started crying, and it was just one of those days I cried. And I remember my mom coming up because she was my support person. She was the person I talked to. She was my counselor. And she came up and she said, Ashley, I know what you're going through hurts. but I promise you, I believe everything happens for a reason, and this experience is going to make you a stronger person. This is going to make sense. And for some reason, my mom gave me lots of words of encouragement and support throughout, those times. And I remember holding on to those words. I remember thinking about them and reflecting on them. And I thought to myself, why me? Why is this happening to me? And the more I thought about it, I decided to make my own purpose. I decided to make my own reason for my struggles. For my struggles. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I want to help people. I want to be that person that people can talk to about the things that they're struggling with. And as the years progressed and I learned more about mental health and psychology as it became more relevant in our society, I realized I wanted to be a counselor. And specifically for kids, because this is a tough time in life for kids as they're navigating who they are as a person, trying to figure out their people, their support people. This is a new thing for them. It's a new thing for everybody in our society. And so I realized that I wanted to do everything in my power to support the people that I was supporting, these kids that I see on a daily basis. I wanted to do everything I could to help them because I did not want them to feel the way that I felt and to know that they were supported and they had people that were rooting for them and that were behind them in their corner. And so, every day when I go to work, I know what I'm doing is what I was always meant to do. I know that deep in my heart that this is what I was supposed to do with my life. This was my reason. Because of what I went through, this gave me purpose. And that helped me motivate myself, become more energized, and gave me purpose and hope again in my life. And my favorite thing about what I do is knowing that the kids that I get to sit with every day, I might be with them on some of their darkest days, but I'm also with them on some of their greatest and brightest days. I'm with them when they feel happier and they feel more energized and they're more motivated and they start getting hope too. And my hope is that these kids, as they leave Catalpa and they graduate from therapy, go on to tell their stories too. And so my hope in sharing my story and my journey with mental health is that we remember that mental health is not discriminatory. We remember that mental health doesn't care about race or gender or religion or your job or your status in society. We're all impacted by mental health in some capacity, whether it's our child, a parent, a family friend, whoever, a teacher. We're all influenced by mental health. And we need to continue sharing our stories to inspire others to share their stories and continue to raise awareness and continue to build programs and educate each other. We need to listen to one another and be kind and compassionate with one another. And remember that we are all struggling with something that maybe nobody else knows about. Thank you.
Can we have another round of applause for the storytellers, please? Thank you all so much. It really took a lot of courage to do what you just did, and we thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. So now I'd like to ask our panelists to come up to the stage, and we will begin the panelist discussion. So to get things started, I'll have each of you just take the mic and introduce yourselves and say where you're from and what you do.
My name is Debbie Peters, and I am the Executive Director of Community for Hope. We are a nonprofit organization serving Winnebago County for suicide prevention, intervention, and grief support. We were formed over 17 years ago.
Good evening. My name is Matt Kemmer. I'm the Director of Pupil Services for the Oshkosh Area School District. I've been in my role as the Director of Pupil Services for 4 years now. And in that role, I oversee all health and mental health services. So part of that is overseeing our school psychologists, school counselors, school social workers, nurses. Prior to taking on my current role, I was a school psychologist in the district for 7 years.
Good evening. I'm Barbara Gulke. I'm the founder and executive director for the Center for Suicide Awareness. We're located in Kaukauna. We're a statewide agency that does support groups for suicide prevention. We do prevention, intervention, and postvention, as well as one of our biggest initiatives is we were the ones that brought the Hope Line, the text-based support line, into the state of Wisconsin.
Great. So first, we're going to kick this off with a question just about the prevalence. We know that teen suicide is an issue. Can you touch on how prevalent it is here in the Oshkosh area, Winnebago County?
Winnebago County, in particular, has been hit hard over a very long period of time. We are losing children to suicide at a higher rate than the state average, and it's also higher than the national average. So, of course, the loss of one student is just too many.
For the school district, one of the ways that we track mental health is something called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So that's something that's done every 2 years in the school district. It's actually being done right now in our district. The last time it was done was 2016. And there are a few indicators on the YRBS, is what it's called for short, that factor into mental health and to suicide risk in particular. And for the Oshkosh Area School District, one of the things that's always been alarming is that we're above the national average on a lot of those key indicators, and we're even above the state average in some of those. So a lot of the programming and things we've been doing lately, one of our key goals is to bring those percentages down for those indicators.
Also, when we talk about data, the Hope Line, the text-based emotional support line, brings in that data. One of the things that we always are concerned about, that suicidal thinking and suicidal thoughts are always in the top 5. So our youth are texting in, and when those topics come about, it's depression, anxiety, but suicidal thinking always sits up on the top 5. So it is a huge concern.
And I'd just like to follow up, Matt, you talked about using the data and trying to bring those numbers down. Are there any specific examples of programs you've implemented in Oshkosh to try to deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Over the past few years, we've really made a concerted effort to take a closer look at our mental health framework and figure out where we have gaps and try to fill those gaps. And one of the things that we did is we partnered with Samaritan Counseling and Catalpa Health to create our Rise Up program. And that's really a comprehensive program that focuses in 3 areas. It focuses on education, so not only educating our students, but educating our staff so they can recognize the signs and symptoms within the students. Another piece of that education is, we educate students not only through our health curriculum, but we adopted a program called Sources of Strength, which is a peer-led initiative. And what it does is it allows peers to educate one another on risk factors for mental health issues, but it also helps promote health and wellness. And really the goal of it is to destigmatize mental health. So it's something that kids are talking about more, and it becomes something that they're not ashamed of, so they're more likely to seek help. Another big part of the program is universal screening. So at the high school level, every student in the Oshkosh Area School District is screened for mental health issues unless they opt themselves out or their parents opt them out. And then finally, Catalpa Health does provide clinical therapy services in a number of our schools, which has been a huge benefit for a lot of our students, particularly those students who have barriers in place that would have prevented them from receiving those services otherwise.
Great, thank you. I'd just like to take a minute to remind everybody, if you have questions for the panel, you can write them down on the note cards at your seats, and Rob Menser will come around and collect them. He's in the back. If you are watching online, feel free to just type your question into the comment section, and we will get to that as well. So what should parents be looking for? What kinds of questions should they be asking their children around the dinner table, in the car after practice? Can you touch on some of those things?
Sure. I think whenever we're talking about suicide, you have fear. And so when people will disclose on the Hope Line, they'll always be like, I can't tell my parents, they'd freak out. And that freaking out is what stops people from disclosing that things are going on and they are struggling. So even if we're freaking out inside, becoming comfortable with how, I love how you said, breaking down that stigma of mental health. We heard people struggle, everybody struggles. And so having those conversations of, I love car rides because you know what, they're contained. They can't get away from you. Sometimes just having those conversations of, what's your favorite thing about the day? What's going on? What are your friends talking about? And definitely, if your children are talking about, you know, so-and-so is talking about suicide, those are great opportunities for you to open up those doors to say, oh, let's talk about this. A lot of times parents will say, and I'm a mom of 3, will say, they don't know anything about this. They do. They do. Many a times kids will say, my parents don't know, but someone on my soccer team or someone in my school or someone that I know, friend of a friend, has died by suicide. So having those conversations even when you freak out, sometimes those are the best opportunities for good, healthy conversations.
One of the things that we always stress with our students and our staff is if you see something, say something. And that's really important. In terms of signs and symptoms, some basic ones can be abrupt changes in mood. So if the child seems more depressed, more angry than normal, they're sleeping more than usual, if you see dramatic changes in grades, or if there's an activity or something that they used to find a lot of joy in that they no longer do. Some of those are just general signs of being a teenager, but if it's more pronounced than what you would expect, and really, as a parent, if you have a gut feeling that something is not right, the best thing you can do is be straightforward and ask your child. You're not going to be putting any ideas in their head if you ask them straight up, are you depressed? Are you thinking about killing yourself? In a lot of cases, if they are, they'll tell you, and then you can respond appropriately.
So part of our work, and we're all involved in the village that it takes to raise a child, is training, that we can train anybody. And one of the programs that we use is QPR, Question, Persuade, and Refer, which we've offered here. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people attending the QPR sessions that are multi-generational. So in an example where we're seeing a lot of grandparents who may be the primary caregivers of their grandchildren, or scout leaders, church leaders, employers of some of these kids. They see that habits change, sleeping, eating, that type of thing, moodiness. These prevention tools are something that anybody can learn and anybody can use to save someone's life, so that hopefully we're both reactionary and we can prevent suicide ideation or suicide habits before they start, and we can get them the help that they need, which is another great asset that we have in our community, is the resources that we can provide. And sometimes it's just making a phone call or two to reach out, or hitting a website to see what those resources are and where we can direct you to get help.
Okay, and I think we have a couple questions from the audience.
Thank you. We have some really good questions. This is a question that speaks to the village raising the child. How much of your focus is on changing cultural norms? For example, law enforcement's response to somebody who may be struggling, or a teacher who may make a student feel ashamed, or other sort of larger cultural issues.
That's a really good question. We do a lot of training with law enforcement. My background came from the Department of Justice. And sometimes just having the ability to understand when somebody's in crisis, they might not be thinking clearly. So they might not be listening to an officer say, you know, can you stay in the car, and so forth. And so we do a lot of training, and like Debbie said, education is powerful. Sometimes it's not that they are not helping, it's that they just don't have the education. And so understanding what a person looks like in crisis, what words you can use, what body language, slowing down your vocabulary, your tone, all of those can de-escalate. And so I think working with law enforcement, it is an education of how do you deal with somebody in crisis versus how do you deal with somebody that's not in crisis.
From an educational standpoint, we've been focusing a lot, in addition to mental health, on trauma-informed care. It seems more and more every year we have students coming to us who have had really significant adverse childhood experiences, and really it takes a shift in the mindset to approach students in those situations the right way. So instead of thinking about what's wrong with this child, you're always thinking about what's happened to this child instead. Along with that, we have a lot of discussions around equality versus equity. And when you think about things in terms of equality, the mentality is everybody should get the same. Everybody has to get the same in order for it to be fair. And really, we know that some students have more needs than others, so we frame it in terms of equity. We want to make sure that every student has what they need to succeed. And for some students, maybe that's a little bit more of one thing than another student is going to get, but really in the end, it's going to be best for everyone.
What I like seeing in our community is that suicide prevention training, mental health discussions are taking place in training with law enforcement. Almost every teacher in Winnebago County is trained in QPR. And I should backtrack a little bit. Almost every employee of every school district. So it's coaches, it's teachers, it's the staff that's in the lunchroom, it's the custodial staff, it's everyone, so that they're all able to help recognize these signs and symptoms, ask that question, are you thinking of suicide, persuade them to get help, and where do we refer them for help. So it's not just in one area, it's across the board.
Here's one. What role does alcohol and drug abuse play in discussions about youth health?
Huge. Right now, Winnebago County has had 10 losses to suicide in the first 2 months of the year. 10. And we are seeing more and more of the implications of addictions to alcohol, addictions to opioids, other addictions that are factoring into mental health challenges, such as gambling, sexual misconduct. So it's all linking in and playing a part in that. But 10 is really high. We had 24 losses to suicide in Winnebago County last year, and now we're at 10. It is something that is a constant. From a youth standpoint, it is something that is a rising concern that factors into their mental health and their day-to-day lives.
I would echo that, and that's one of the reasons why we really try to help students build appropriate coping skills early on. A lot of individuals that haven't built those coping skills kind of resort to drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. It's a very easy to access coping strategy that's very effective. So if people have coping skills going into it, hopefully chances are that they rely on substances less.
Absolutely. Even you were talking about, they'll use it as a coping skill. A lot of times drinking in the state of Wisconsin is very much acceptable. Sometimes we, applaud that we're always like one of the #1 states for drinking. And that echoes down to our youth, that it's acceptable. And so a lot of times you'll hear kids say, I self-medicate by, instead of taking my depression medication, or I take my depression medication with alcohol. That's definitely going to play into your mental health. And again, how you're talking about what has happened to somebody, not what's wrong with somebody, again, plays also. So it's not you just dealing with the one thing, you're dealing with a multiple things.
A question that I know is on people's minds because we've had it at every event that we've done so far. Does something like the Youth Risk Survey extend into the elementary school level? Question for Matt. What is the Oshkosh Area School District doing to get appropriate community mental health resources into elementary school?
Yeah, so the Youth Risk Behavior Survey goes from 6th grade through 12th grade. So that's not something that we can access at the elementary level. We do look at other indicators, though, in terms of our data collection, and a lot of that is our behavioral data, because a lot of the mental health issues that we see in elementary school result in significant behaviors. So what was the second part of that question? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, it's getting the services into elementary schools, right? I mean, that's
right.
How to target that population.
Yeah, so as part of our Rise Up program, we do have clinical mental health support through CATELPA in a couple of our elementary schools. We would really like to expand that because it is an invaluable service that those students can access. But we try to meet student needs the best that we can through a number of ways. But we have something called PBIS at all of our schools, and that's positive behavioral interventions and supports. And really what it is, it's a universal structure that provides basic expectations for behaviors. But really that gives us a framework that helps us to identify areas where students may have deficits. So PBIS handles the universal, so that meets the needs of about 85% of our student population. Students who need something more than what universal support provides, we have Tier 2 PBIS supports that provide some sort of basic groups and interventions. And then finally at the Tier 3 level, that's the 1 to 2% of students that have behaviors or other mental health needs that are pretty significant and go beyond what can be handled with those two basic levels of support. And in those instances, we have amazing counselors, school psychologists, social workers in all of our schools that can either work with students in small groups, can do some one-on-one stuff with students, but ultimately, if their needs go beyond what we can manage in the school setting, we refer them out to community providers.
I think one of the constants that I continually remind myself is that we can't assume that parents are equipped properly to take care of their children. Many parents they're hurting themselves. They are in need of care themselves. So it has this ripple down effect that we have to continue to watch out for one another. And I think what I am most proud of in this community is how we work together. We're not in our own little pods. For example, the Oshkosh School District, Matt has launched several new initiatives, but it's not just Matt alone. A lot of us are at the table. We are all working really hard to become part of the solution of this problem.
Another question for Matt. What type of projects are students working on with Sources of Strength? And can you say a little bit more about that peer counseling program?
Sure. So Sources of Strength is a really, really cool program. We had our staff and our students trained in November, and we had about between 70 and 90 students from each of our high schools trained. So I think this spring semester, the goal for both schools was really getting the word out about what is Sources of Strength, how can it benefit our school environment. One of the campaigns that our Sources of Strength teams work on toward the beginning of it is called Trusted Adult, where they're just looking for ways to get the names out there of who students within the school see as a trusted adult. So if students are struggling, they can identify, well, maybe their best friend has a trusted adult who's the gym teacher, and that's somebody now that maybe I can go to and talk to about the things that I'm dealing with. So those are some of the campaigns that typically kick it off. I know I don't want to put Summer on the spot here, but Summer is an Oshkosh West student who's actually in Sources of Strength. So I don't know if there's any campaigns that you're working on right now that you wanted to mention.
Like I said before to Matt, we are doing
Positive Peer Week coming up, so we are starting to spread the word about sources of strength and what it is all about. I know in the past few months we have made videos about the mission statement of Sources of Strength, and we are doing a bunch of activities in the next coming week to completely spread the word about what Sources of Strength is all about.
Now, would you like to sing a song?
Talk about the village and, going through counseling and all this. If I, as a parent, know this exists, but I know my student's not going to willingly go, is that something that the counselors potentially, if I shared with them, hey, could one of the students from SOS reach out to my student? So you kind of are directing it, but I know if I mentioned it to them, I would get an eye roll and a walk away.
So I think that one of the main points of Sources of Strength is uniting the students at schools. And I know that during Positive Peer Week, we are doing a lot of activities to sort of get students together and pull students together that usually wouldn't communicate or hang out with. And so during the activities, I'm not sure how they're going to go exactly. Like, I'm not sure if they're during W hour, which is like an hour between classes where students can get help. But I know that the activities are trying to get students together and trying to get students that need help to get that help from other students.
One of the really cool things about Sources of Strength, too, is when we identify students for the program, we try to get a very diverse social network. So it's not just your leadership kids, your student council kids that are involved in everything. It's maybe some of those kids, but maybe it's some athletes. Maybe it's some students in the drama club. Maybe it's some students who really aren't involved in anything at all. And what we look for are students we call bridge students. And those are kids that can move from one peer group to the next relatively easily. And the idea is if we get as many bridge kids as we possibly can, the more social networks are going to be impacted. And hopefully, ultimately, we're reaching every social network within the school. And that's why we target so many students. West is a school of 1,600 kids, and we had, roughly 80 students participate in the Sources of Strength training this year. And really, our goal going forward is to get more than that, more than 100 kids involved. So really, we're reaching the entire population.
We're also working with another agency to bring the Sources of Strength program to the adults so that we're speaking the same language, we're adopting the same philosophy, that we can support what's going on at school outside of school. We hope to have that training in May, so maybe soon.
So this is a question, as written, is another sort of school question, but I think it can apply to more broadly even than that. What is the plan for kids who are missing school or having other behaviors as a result of anxiety or depression that are accumulating detentions or failing classes? These are negative things that may push them further inside, and the punishments may not help. And that's where it's, how do you balance sort of there are consequences to actions with that somebody may be expressing a mental illness?
Yeah, that's a relatively common issue in the schools, unfortunately. And for a lot of students who struggle with mental health issues to the point where it's impacting their education, a lot of times what we try to do is develop a 504 plan, which is an accommodation plan where we can put things in place like homebound services or maybe put more lenient guidelines in place so students have more time to complete homework, that sort of thing. If it's significant enough to the point where a student would qualify for special education, we would develop an IEP, an individualized education plan, that could provide special education services specifically for addressing the student's area of disability. But really, we try to be as accommodating as possible. If we know there are mental health issues in place, we know that along with that comes significant barriers for not only students but families. So I mean, if there are ways that we can support families in that, we most certainly do. Unfortunately, a lot of times mental health issues and other risk factors do result in behaviors as well. And you know, we try to be sensitive with those, but we don't look at it that we're punishing students. I think if you ask any student in the school, they understand that there are certain things that if they do, there are going to be consequences for their behavior. That doesn't mean that just because there are consequences that we're trying to punish them or you know, kick them out of school or really have some adverse result come out of it. You know, ultimately we want to try to build a stronger relationship with those students so we can address the deficit or whatever it is that is leading to the behaviors in the first place and really solving the problem.
I like how you brought up about an IEP and a 504. A lot of times people don't realize, you know, school is part of the solution when you're working with it. A lot of times the family feels very alone when they're dealing with mental health, stigma, the embarrassment of saying, you know, I'm asking for help. And so something simple as if they have anxiety disorder, that maybe time tests might be something that's absolutely something that overwhelms them. So working with the school, and I like that you use those terms because a lot of people don't know that those are options in schools. So having those conversations, working with your schools and your teachers and your agencies can really, it is, like you said, bringing the village together.
I have a question. Can you speak about the, you know, so this is a world of social media that we live in, and especially our young people. Can you speak about the ways that social media can make things worse or may be a tool for healing for some?
Okay. Seeing that the Hope Line is text-based, it's a positive thing. Texting is becoming our form of communication for our youth. They're much more comfortable sometimes texting versus talking for a lot of different reasons. It's faster, it's quicker. You can do, you know, anonymous. Somebody doesn't see if there's an inflection in my voice. Those type of things. Social media is great for Googling and getting to where you have, but there's also a downside to social media. A lot of our youth say that they don't even realize the cell phone turns off. You know, always being constantly connected and then being so connected to your cell phone that you've isolated from others. We were just working with a group of kids that use video games, and a lot of them just sit and isolate. So there's a happy medium. Social media is great. We've been able to connect with friends that we maybe went to grade school with, but yet it also can be the downside of never being able to turn off and always feeling like you have to be connected.
You know, as a parent, and I think it's important to set an example for our kids, and I oftentimes fail at this. So I could sit on Pinterest forever, and I should probably be conversing with my husband or call my mom or something like that. So I think we also have to never underestimate our ability to be very big, positive role models for our children. They mimic our behavior. And believe it or not, they do want to know the opinion of their parents. They do want boundaries set. And again, talking about isolation, we need to teach kids that this is proper etiquette, this is rude. There are other things in life to do. What are some of your hobbies? What do you enjoy doing? Get some fresh air, get some exercise. I think we all could agree that for all of us, that's good information or good recommendations, and then model that behavior for the children that we're in care of.
Kind of jumping off of that, social media, and you mentioned hobbies, getting outside. What do you recommend parents do to promote good mental health with their children?
Let's start on that one. Being there for them, having a relationship, talking with them, having a trusted adult in your life is such a huge protective factor. I don't think most people realize how important it is, and a lot of people take it for granted. But along with that, I talked about building resiliency and helping children develop coping strategies. I can't emphasize enough how important that is for later in life.
Exactly, and modeling, like you said. You know, some people love yoga. I don't like yoga at all. So I won't model yoga, but we might model taking a walk, reading a book, listening to music, having those conversations and giving the ideas to your youth of these are actually coping skills. Like you said, these are going to bring resilience. And always just being present. Sometimes you don't need to talk. You just need to listen. Any of you that have teenagers, just let them keep on going. Because they will give you a lot of information if you just actually be silent. And being silent sometimes is a great coping skill. Shutting everything down and saying, I just want to be quiet for a while.
Matt had touched on protective factors, and I think as you look around in your own lives, or I look at personally in my own life and my own community, the more that you can build your child up in all areas of their lives. Do they have relationships with the neighbors? You know, are they shoveling for a neighbor? Can they go play cribbage with grandma and grandpa? You know, I just love that. Do they fish? Do they hunt? Do they crochet? You know, are they involved in extracurriculars at school? They're able to build that circle of protection that is around them, so that when there is a time of crisis, and there is going to be in anybody's life, it might be that first non-A that they receive, or perhaps mom and dad are going through divorce, or whatever that situation might be, that they feel that they have someone that they can trust. Faith communities are really important in that area too. Scouts, the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, those types of things. Tap into that. And don't feel as a parent, I think sometimes I felt my kids' successes or failures were all my fault. But, you know, once in a while it was their dad's or grandma. So, you know, that type of thing. But we try to continually build that community that's around each child.
Switching gears a little bit, we unfortunately hear more and more about young people who share with their friends or post on social media their plans to take their lives, and no one reported it. Their friends didn't take them seriously or didn't report it for whatever reason. What advice do you have for youth and teenagers who may have concerns about their friends? Where should they turn to? Who should they talk to if they see something or hear something?
Sure. It's right up my alley. And that's actually how Hopeline started, is we noticed there was a huge gap with a lot of our youth who either were attempting suicide or died by suicide. They were reaching out to their friends. You know, they were saying, this breakup really hurts, or like you said, I got an A and that's not acceptable for me. A lot of times people don't realize perfectionism is a warning sign. You have nothing but either you're a loser or you're a winner. And so they were reaching out, but their friends had to go to bed, and their friends had to, you know, their mom was yelling them to do dishes, and they didn't have the skills to say, you know what, you're scaring me, and you're talking about suicide, and I need to get involved. Or they don't have the cognitive skills to say, you know what, this is real. This isn't just that they're talking about something. And so get involved. People always say, but my friend's going to be mad if I say anything. They might be mad for a few days, but you know what? They're alive. We always call it the deadly secret. Suicide, and somebody talking about suicide, is not a secret that you ever keep. Be it youth, be it adults, be it anything. Tell, and tell. If the first person doesn't believe you or blows it off, then you go to the next person and the next person until you get somebody that says, this is serious enough.
One of the things we teach our students is ACT, acknowledge, care, tell. So acknowledging means that you empathize. You say, I see that you're struggling. It looks like you're having a difficult time right now. Caring is expressing, how can I help you? I'm worried about you. I'm here for you. And then telling is making sure that there's a trusted adult or some resource that you're reaching out for. If there's ever a student who's in imminent danger, 911. You know, if things are happening and you're worried about the immediate safety of that child, whether you're adult, whether you're a student, act immediately. One of the other things we talk a lot about, I think there's a natural inclination for everybody, is when a student, when anybody says that they're struggling or feeling sad, the first thing we want to do is try to make them feel better. And a lot of times we'll even kind of downplay their feelings and saying, well, it's not that bad. You'll get over it. And really, the acknowledging and caring part is just, instead of trying to make them feel better, just letting them know that you're there for them, you're there to support them, and you will help them through whatever they're going through.
I sit on the child death review team for Winnebago County. It's probably one of the most difficult things that I do. However, the work is very serious, and I think if there's one thing I would like to leave you with a takeaway with that is lethal means restriction. 49.6% of all losses by suicide are by a firearm. And I know Barb can attest to the data that she collects, that taking somebody from a warm or a hot moment to a cool moment, even in the fact that if you have a firearm that's locked up, that's put away, and the ammunition is in another spot, that time lapse between that is critical, very, very critical. And again, the climate, the demographic that we live in, there's plenty of guns in my house. I have hunters in my family. And again, to take those lethal means away, stockpiling pills. I speak to grandparents quite often, and they know their medication is missing. A little bit here and a little bit there, and so on and so forth. They think they're losing their mind. They're not. Their grandchildren are coming in, or their own children, and they're taking those medications. So that's another thing to be watchful for. One of the, in addition to the Hope Line, one of the other resources that I really love is called, it's an app that you can put on your phone. It's called A Friend Asks. A Friend Asks. In that case of an emergency, you have everything you need in that app. You just tap it. You tap one little triangle. I know they're using it in health classes in several of the high schools. And what Matt is speaking of that's being done in the Oshkosh School District with identifying people that they trust, adults that they trust. I know it's working. Community for Hope provides folders for the high school health classes, and I was recently at an event at UW Oshkosh, and I had quite a few students that came up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, Mr. Gerhardt's made us put down the names of 5 people we trust," and it was on that folder. I had to look at that folder every day during second semester health class. But they remembered who those names were, and they saw it every day. So another good coping skill, building resiliency, knowing that there's somebody there that they can turn to in their most difficult time.
District at the elementary level that are in true crisis. And I think these kids aren't being connected. They don't know who their trusted adult is. And so by the time they get to middle school, they have no connections, they have no friends, they have no trusted adult. And it's almost like we're reactive. By the time they get to middle school and high school, we're being reactive. I love this program, this Sources of Strength. But is that going on in the elementary school?
Middle school, I think, is the lowest level that they've been, as far as I know. At some point, I would like for our high school Sources of Strength teams and our middle school Sources of Strength teams, once we develop those, to go down to the elementary level and have conversations with our elementary school students in the event that we can't bring it to them too. Along with that, we have amazing elementary school guidance counselors that touch on a lot of issues, and one of them that they hit on regularly is trusted adults as a part of the elementary school curriculum. So we do touch on it, but I think you're right in that there's not anything like Sources of Strength that consistently reinforces it. So as that program continues to expand, maybe at some point it would reach out. Good question. By far the best way to go. Unfortunately, for something like Sources of Strength, there's not at the current time a research-based program that addresses the issue in the same way that Sources of Strength does. But like I said, hopefully as time goes on, there is something like that developed at elementary level.
To piggyback on your question, our board president is a pediatrician here in town. And she is sharing with us that she is dealing with bullying with her little ones that are coming in. And that's part of that mental health wellness check that pediatricians and primary care physicians are also doing with their patients. With programs that we're hearing of that are, when we have the ability to find out that they're evidence-based, they're working somewhere else, best practices, we talk about those things. Then what happens is these guys have to fight for the money. We're all fighting for money. We have to fund our own programs with donations. And that's a huge part of our struggle. Of course, I think every school district would like more services on their campuses if they had the money to hire more social workers, more counselors, that type of thing. And unfortunately, that's a huge battle that we're fighting right now.
This will be our last question before we wrap up. So, in the wake of the Parkland, Florida school shooting, obviously it's a very terrible situation and it's very, very complicated. But it seems like the conversation in these types of situations always loses all nuance, and it ends up being a debate between people who think it's a mental health issue and people who think it's a gun issue. And I'm wondering, as mental health professionals, what your thoughts are on that and what kind of an impact it has.
Great.
No pressure.
Great. You're right in that it's a very complex issue. And with issues as complex as this, I can't imagine that there's one thing that we can do to totally fix the problem. So I would say it's neither, it's both. I think both of those factors and many others need to be addressed if we're serious about improving school safety.
It's always interesting after not only a school shooting, but any kind of crisis, even like the hurricanes that we experience, the Hope line gets flooded with those questions. I agree with you. It's a complex. It'd be great if there was just one simple answer to it. The bottom line is there's a lot of fear. And where there's fear, you have that reactiveness. Do something and do something now. I think it's both. I think we have to take care of our mental health. mental health across the United States has to be more on a top burner instead of a back burner. We always hear about, oh, it was a mental health, you know, and we're starting to put equations together like they had mental health issues after a situation. How about instead of being reactive, saying, let's take care of mental health and then worry about the other issues?
I see, if I can identify without collecting data, from what I hear and just my experiences, it's unresolved anger is a large part of that, and perhaps also not being taken seriously when there are concerns that are voiced. And I think we just all have to continually be kinder to one another, be attentive to our neighbor and to those that are in our classroom, and just be a kinder people.
Thank you. Well, that is all we have time for tonight. Before we go, there are a few quick things I'd like to mention. We've launched a podcast about youth mental health called This Is Normal. And in at least one of our podcast episodes, we're going to include stories from our live events. So please, you can take your phones out now. We won't judge you for it. And subscribe if you're a podcast listener. It's called This Is Normal, and I have a brief promo I am going to play for you.
I remember like walking into the hospital. Everybody's looking at me and I felt so embarrassed because I was crying and still having my panic attack. And my mom was crying and she's screaming and she's like, we need to get in right now. Like, my daughter just swallowed a bunch of pills. And then I drank the charcoal and that's the last thing I remember.
I've been writing about youth mental health for over 2 years with the Kids in Crisis Project.
We've talked to teenagers and young people from all over the state about how they faced mental health challenges and how they made it through them.
With this podcast, we want to bring their voices directly through your speakers.
That night, if we would have knew if that was our last night, we would have just held on to her.
They handcuffed me, put me in the car. I was back in like maximum security, basically. And I never committed a crime. I remember one night I can still remember I was like screaming in my cell late at night, all alone.
Every time I talk to a young person about their mental health, I'm amazed at just the openness that they have. I think stigma is really coming down around mental health, and young people are at really the forefront of that push.
I'm Rob Menser. I'm an editor for USA Today Network Wisconsin.
And I'm Rory Linnane, a reporter for the network based in Milwaukee.
Welcome to This Is Normal.
Because this is normal.
We need more help. And more help is more progress, because we don't need perfection in mental illness. We need progress so it can be better.
This is Normal, a new podcast about youth mental health, coming in March from USA Today Network Wisconsin. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or find them on our websites.
All right. And I would also ask you before you leave to sign up for our newsletter on your way out. It comes out once a week, so it's not going to clog up your inbox, I promise. It includes links to our latest reporting in the Kids in Crisis series. We have a day of action coming up in Madison in May, so details about that will be in the newsletter. There you go. And we'll release more information about the day of action when we get closer. We'd like to give another huge thank you to our storytellers and our panelists for sharing their experiences and expertise with us, so thank you. And just another quick note, Frankie has inspirational CDs for sale outside. They're $15 and $5 of every purchase goes towards Community for Hope. And thank you all for being here tonight. Whether you're watching online or you're here in person, your support of the series means so much to us. So thank you, and keep in touch.